Welcome to the Seeds of Liberty podcast, episode 15. We are shy of Danilo this week, so I'll be taking the lead, but I think our guest will more than make up for it. We are joined by Ben Stone, also possibly better known as the Bad Quaker. He is the operator of badquaker.com and also a regular co-host on the Freedom Feens. Thank you very much for joining us, Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Before we get into things, I just want to mention that the Seeds of Liberty podcast is covered by the BIPCOT no-gov license. This allows reuse by anyone except for governments and the agents thereof. You can find out more information about that at bipcot.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org. All right, so Ben, I think this week we're going to be talking about the Backfire Effect, but we usually do ask our guests to give a little information about themselves, if you don't mind, for people who may not know about you yet. If you want to fill us in with some things, and then we'll get started.
Sure. I'm an old guy. I'm really old. And getting older every day. My wife and I are retired. We kind of roll around the countryside in our really nice RV. We wasted our retirement fund on that, to have that, and to, well, not all of our retirement fund. We still have enough to live on. But we just move around from place to place and hopefully avoid government as much as possible. And I stay as, you know, by being mobile like that, I can poke at the state from different directions and hopefully not feel the wrath of it if it ever figures out where I'm at and comes after me. But I don't have too much fear about that. I'm a pretty minor cog in a giant wheel of all of us.
What's the general thought? You know, the state doesn't care what you do, as long as you're not going to put any action behind it. As far as violence, they don't really care. The slave can cry all he wants, right?
Yep, very true. You have to annoy. You know, I look at this is way off any topic that we might touch, but I look at the possibility of feeling government wrath on different levels. Like the first level, probably the most likely, is dealing with a cop. He's having a bad day. He's not, you know, he's just a bad attitude or whatever, and you got to deal with him. But if you imagine all government agents on all levels are essentially the same as a cop, you know, you could cross one accidentally at any particular level, and he just decides, hey, you know, I work for the government, I can do anything I want and get away with it. And, you know, they're all just as dangerous as that cop on the street who's having a bad day who didn't get his donut today. It's just, you know, they're all on different levels, and we don't interact with all of them as often as we interact with cops because they're everywhere. I don't know.
How dare you strike a king's servant?
Yeah.
No, it's funny you say that, though, because, you know, you're talking about trying to stay out of their path as much as possible, which I think most of us are keenly aware of doing at all times. But I actually had a situation, what was that, yesterday, where I actually had to legitimately break into a client's house because a lock on their door had engaged that had never engaged before, and they were out of town, and I had to get in, and I had their permission to use a ladder and climb in through their window. But even they warned me. They said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because if the men in uniform show up, they're an old hippie couple. That's how they refer to them, the men in uniform. If they show up, you know, we're not there, so you may want to be careful." And it's like, I actually tweeted about it. It's like, it's kind of scary that you actually are doing something you have permission to do, and you still have to have that fear in the back of your head. Like, what if you do, one passes by who is having a really bad day, and is just looking for somebody to take their anger out on.
It's like running a stoplight or a stop sign in the middle of the, you know, bum freaking Egypt. There's no one around for miles, and you're still like, oh God, did anybody see me?
I think deep down inside, everybody knows. You know, you're driving along, you're minding your own business, you're below the speed limit, you've got your lights correct, and everything's right, and a cop, you suddenly look up in your rearview mirror, and there's a cop right there. Nobody that I've ever encountered goes, "Oh, I'm so happy there's a cop right behind me." Everybody just gets that feeling in their stomach like, "Oh, crap. I don't want that. You know, don't look at me. Maybe I can turn here. Can I just go into a parking lot, do anything to keep that guy from, because who knows what he's thinking, who knows what his day is like, and
He might be bored.
yeah, and who knows what's going to trigger him. And I think deep down inside, even the most hardcore statist feels that when the cop is right behind him in the rearview mirror. They just don't want to admit it.
Well, when you rule by fear, that's the response you get.
Yeah.
It's the response you're looking for. So.
Yeah, obedience and fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I see a cop behind me, I get in the slow lane and I outslow them. I make them pass me. But I drive the speed limit everywhere I go because I'm paid hourly and I'm in no rush.
Yeah, well, you have that advantage. I'm employed by myself, and my business depends on me being able to hustle. So I don't have that luxury. I have my radar detector and Waze going on my phone at all times.
Well, I have the radar detector.
My head's on a swivel.
They fly planes out over some of the interstates here, so it doesn't matter what radar you got. So I guess I'll give a little background on what the backfire effect is before we get into it. Something I found the other day. I don't know why. I was just looking through it. Maybe someone on Reddit said something about it or something. But I just wanted to define what the backfire effect is and why this is a common problem for anyone speaking what they consider the truth or want people to realize something that they've found, a viable knowledge to have. The backfire effect occurs in the face of contradictory evidence. Established beliefs do not change but actually get stronger. The effect has been demonstrated experimentally in psychological tests where subjects are given data that either reinforces or goes against their existing biases. In almost all cases, people can be shown to increase their confidence in their prior position regardless of the evidence they are faced with. This makes most refutations useless. So when you're debating with someone and they just keep hammering down on the same point, to continue the charade is pointless, right?
Yeah, and I think we've all seen that to a certain extent in social media, where somebody says something and a conversation begins to engage, and you see that moment when they just lock their heels down and they're not going to be budged, and they're not going to look at your references, and they're not going to accept any premise that you might have, and they just start spouting fallacies and they start spouting slogans. And at that point in time, the astute observer should recognize that this person is not going to budge. They just lock themselves into their position, and it doesn't matter. If they're arguing there's no such thing as a tidal wave, and there's a tidal wave that's coming down on them and they're already feeling the water, they're still going to deny it. They just lock into their position and they're not going to budge.
Yeah, that's why, what I would say is my approach has changed. I think Ben saw it. I had him tagged in a little bit of a back and forth with a guy a few weeks ago. And I wasn't confrontational at all. I only asked the guy questions and made him prove his point. And even then, he was basically like, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I've been this for X years. I know this because I've studied this. And it's like, it's more of a philosophical point I take on things. It's stop knowing and start asking. The minute you think you know something, you've allowed your brain to go dead on any X subject.
Well, something you touched there is using the Socratic method, where you, instead of trying to tell them something, you ask them questions that force them to give an answer that's going to make them think. And sometimes doing that, that's a very effective means. But sometimes in doing that, it will generate so much anger on the part of the other person, because you are actually forcing them to think about what they're saying. And of course, the fun side of that is, that if there's anybody else who's watching, there's a real good likelihood that they're going to see that, I'm just asking you a question and look how you're reacting to it. Or I'm just asking you a question, why won't you answer that question? And anybody viewing that will very often see the fallacy of the other person's position. But there's a counter effect to this too. And I think if I can put on my foil hat for a moment, we know for a fact that the government has engaged lots and lots and lots of people to go on social media. I mean, this is all, the documentation is all out there. This is not, this is not craziness or anything, but they have engaged a lot of people to go on social media and make arguments for pro-government positions. And so, one of the things that I have observed in that kind of situation is that if they can get the conversation so convoluted and so many different, like if they can throw 20 questions at you before you can address one thing, and it becomes obvious that they're just filling the thread with, hammer hits, bam, 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 and it becomes wearisome for the side observer to go through and read every single one of those, and it drives away the audience. So all they're really doing in that case, they're kind of using the backfire effect against you. They're not coming at it looking for the truth. They're trying to get you to go into a position where you get so frustrated with yourself that you say something, that you revert to name calling or some of the other fallacies that we're so familiar with. And then they can, feel like they've achieved something because they got you to then call them names. I don't know if I talked that in a circle or not, but my main point was that it's according to who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with an honest person who's just confused on a topic and they can, you can talk to them about it, that's one thing. But if you're talking to somebody whose job it is to engage you, waste your time, and fill a thread with nonsense so that they can make you look like an idiot, you're never going to win that argument anyway, and you're not going to win the first one. So in a sense, like my standard is, if I can't get to them within a couple of statements, if I see them lock up or if I see them throw up those blinders and go into that mode, I just
glaze
stop.
Over.
Yeah, exactly. I just stop, because now it's a waste of my time. And if they're a pro, they're going to try to make me look bad. If they're not a pro, I'm not going to convince them of anything anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I never take that advice. I say it to myself all the time. I should. But one of the other things you actually touched on earlier is the reason that I continue going, and that's the people watching in the wings that aren't saying, that aren't typing or aren't saying anything, depending on the situation. I have a tendency to spend a lot of time on social media just because my job, I'm out walking dogs half the day, and it gives me a lot of time to be able to play on the phone while I'm wandering around. So I engage in a lot of these conversations, and I say it all the time because I get people that ask me, why do you waste your time with these people? Why do you keep going? Because there's been conversations that clearly it wasn't going anywhere from the third or fourth line, but I continued on because I know, number one, that I won't let myself get rustled by anybody, so I don't have that fear of slipping into the frustration and the ad hominems like I used to. But I really, my intended target is almost never the person I'm talking to. If somebody wants to engage me, I first of all assume that it's a government troll. Mm-hmm. Just off the bat, because like you said, it really doesn't matter whether they're trying to, either way, you may end up in that position. So I just treat everybody like they could be, and my target audience is always actually the rest of the people that aren't chiming in, because I do exactly as you said. I'll just keep asking the questions. I just had this happen the other night where this guy just kept going and going, and he just kept wanting to recite constitutional rhetoric to me. Like, that's all he had to say. And all I wanted him to do was answer the question, how do you delegate a right to another that you don't possess yourself? That's all I wanted him to do. And he just refused to answer the question.
Well, you see, they answer that question, their entire argument goes to shit.
Yes, I know, but that's the point.
They know that, though.
Yeah.
Hey, when you've got... All right, so my goal in a debate or any kind of discussion, because we're not talking about a political debate where your goal is to destroy the other person's argument. We're talking about a debate of ideas here where you're trying to get that person to come to your realization, right? My goal in a debate is get someone out of the assertion phase, or what I call the assertion phase, into the honest question phase, where they drop the castle doors and they say, okay, explain this to me. I have this question. And they answer, you answer, and you have a back and forth on maybe that answer, instead of this, well, no, this is what this is the truth, no, this is what my pastor told me, this is what the teacher told me, this is what my dad told me. You get them out of that into that question phase. That's the hard part.
Yeah, that's really true. And actually, that's like the gold standard of conversation right there. When you can see that person's, they first throw out, like, well, you just hate roads or whatever, some stupid argument like this, or well, the Second Amendment gives me that right or whatever. And if you can do what you're talking about there, and you get it to the point of where they actually consider and say, well, really, but what about this or what about that? And if you can get them to asking you a question, then it's like, that's like gold. You've got it. You win, because now you can explain it, you explain your position to them. Because the vast majority of these people, especially on the internet, they already think they know your position. And they think your position is stupid.
Boy, do they.
They think you just sit around eating rocks all day because you're so dumb, And they think, well, all I have to do is tell them without the government we wouldn't have roads. And that's it. I got them. That's it.
Like,
that's
what are you, stupid? People would shoot each other.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, they do that now.
Without the police, people would just go in and kill each other. Wait a minute. Oh my!
Without the police, there would be rape would come back. Oh no! Wait a minute! It never went away. It's actually worse because of the police.
Did you hear the whole police? Tom Woods' podcast the other day was talking about the police kill to per 100,000 ratio is higher than in America, is higher than any country in the world that runs those statistics. It's higher than Uganda. Civilians, is higher than Somalian civilians, is higher than Honduran citizens, which Honduras has the highest killed per 100,000 in the world. And if you was to just take American cops per 100,000 to per what they kill, it is astronomically, like it beats Honduras by like 10. So when someone's sitting there telling me we need the cops, I'm like, do you actually understand do you understand all encompassingly, or do you just kind of have assertions that you've bought into about the police? And that throws them further into the backfire effect that we're trying to circumvent here. And, we've got to find different approaches to ideas that we have the facts. The facts, unless you're in a court case, they don't matter.
Right.
Like you're not appealing to someone's, like I was saying before we started recording, when you're debating someone who's been indoctrinated for a majority of their life, you're not debating them. It's like you're running. It's like The Village, the show The Village, or the movie The Village. It's like you running into the village and saying, "Hey, there's an outside world out here," and them going, "No. The elders, they said that there's no outside village here, and they're right. So I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy." So you're not debating that person on the prospect of there being something outside of the village. You're debating what they've been told their whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You're debating what their parents taught them. By telling them that they're wrong, you're telling them that everything, all their whole world of reality is based on a lie, which it is. But you're going against what grandma told them, and you're going against what their favorite Uncle Bill told them, and you're insulting their great heroes that they've built up in their minds. But Abraham Lincoln could walk on water. Don't you know that?
No.
You're breaking things you're breaking things on their knick-knack shelf in their mind that are precious to them, and that's beyond what they can handle.
Yeah, it's funny because I go into most conversations knowing this already, because as we were talking about, most of we deal with this on a regular basis, and I still try, and then I have to remember back to where I was and say, okay, well, I used to be that stupid too, so maybe I should cut him a little slack. But then it still kicks in. It's like, well, wait a minute, I was that stupid and I overcame it. So if I can do it, anybody can. And then it's that battle that rages in my head where I want to force things. I have to deal with it, unfortunately, quite often with my wife, because she was never really a political person. She was more apolitical than anything, and she actually has a lot of libertarian leanings. But she was brought up by a cop. She was raised by a cop.
Oh.
So yeah, and we obviously don't get along, and trying to get her to see, the Backfire Effect definitely kicks in. It's funny, and now I have a name for it that I've learned about.
Yeah, what did I say today? Somebody said something to me today. I said, I'm not going to sit here and fight Backfire Effect, okay? Look, I'm a voluntarist. Since I've found voluntarism, I'm a more happy and more just all around better person, all right? If you want to learn about this, here's some things. I linked them, and I said, I'm not responding to anything else you say, and I didn't. So I said, send me a message if you have any questions. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I've kind of said this in different directions, and I've wondered how, I know there's truth to it, but I wonder how deep the truth is. I say this pretty frequently, actually, that you don't really realize how important air is until you can't get any of it, and then all of a sudden, if you can't get air, it becomes the most important thing, period. Nothing else matters. Pain doesn't matter. Nothing matters except if you can't get air, you have to have air right now. And freedom is a lot like that. And I sometimes wonder, is it possible to get people to understand their need for freedom until that point that the boot is on the back of their neck and they're having their face ground into the pavement? Is there some point ahead of that you can sit down and logicalize with someone, like you're talking to the old fish and not knowing what the sky is, kind of a thing? Is it possible to sit down with this fish and explain to him that if you just swim up toward the light and you just poke your head through, you'll see what I'm talking about? But if you never do that, you'll never see. And I don't know if it's something that has to be that they have to feel that boot in order to recognize that there is such a thing as freedom and that there is such a thing as slavery. It's kind of foreign for me because, I was, in my heart of hearts, I was an anarchist as a kid. I hated teachers. I hated school. I hated being told what to do, and my first encounters with cops were all negative. I always felt like, who do you think you are? I mean, that was just my impression in the first few times I dealt with cops. And so I didn't fully put it together as far as like not voting and stuff. That took a long time. That actually took my adult daughter, sitting me down and confronting me Socratically and asking me questions that I couldn't deal with in any other way. And then I had to abandon voting as well. I was like one of these libertarian anarchists who's not really an anarchist because you still, somewhere in the back of your mind, want to fix things by voting. And it really took her sitting me down and really forcing me to say out loud what I believed in order for me to understand what it was that I really believed and how silly it is to think that I can use the government to fix the government.
Well, that's the same thing I say to, Rand Paul supporters. It's like, oh, but Rand Paul's going to get in and he's going to perfect rape. and I go, I don't want rape perfected. I want rape to be as nasty and brutal and ugly as it is, so everyone fucking sees it.
Yeah.
That's honestly, like you said, it's such a individual thing. You have to feel it for yourself, and you can sit there and tell someone till they're blue in the face that you should be free, and they'll say, no, I shouldn't, until that boot's on their neck, like you said, and then they come running back saying, oh, I was wrong, fuck the government, blah, blah, blah. It's like, if you could have just seen that, maybe I was right, and maybe questioned yourself. Like I said earlier, quit knowing and start asking. Even when you think you have something figured out 100,000%, God is real, the Bible says it, all right? Question everything, all right? Do not end your search for knowledge ever. And I think that's the way you've got to train people in a way to say, hey, maybe you should question these things instead of, hey, you have to accept these things.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people, I know a lot of libertarian leaning and ANCAP type people really look to the next generation and say, well, we have to, raise our children understanding to question these things, raise our children without violence, raise our children to expect, freedom and expect peace. And I agree with all that. I'm in complete agreement with all that. But I think there has to be a second element as well. It can't just be that they all, I kind of get the image from, what was that, Time Machine, where the people on the surface were totally peaceful and totally without any aggression of any kind. And yet they still were preyed upon by the ground dwellers that would come up and eat them. And I kind of imagine that's sort of the libertarian dream of, raising our children and doing all this exactly right, and then they all just hold hands and walk along by the stream and everything's fine. But the state is still going to devour them. I think there's this second component that you have to recognize the government for the evil that it is, and you have to expose that as what it is. And if it weren't for that, I would just go, all right, fine, I've already raised my kids, now I'll just go and, hang out at the beach and watch the sunset and not worry about the rest of this, because I've done my part. My job's done. I raised my kids. They're all three anarchists. I'm done. But I can't leave it at that. I got to go, pick at the beast, poke at him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I too am I'm on board with the whole, I mean, what do they call it, the peaceful parenting now or whatever, teaching them not to use violence unless, in self-defense, which unfortunately I have to deal with already. I have 3 and almost 4-year-old twins, and I already need to teach them about self-defense because they like beating the heck out of one another and one won't retaliate. And I'm like, no, it's okay. You can hit her now. It's fine. But you're right. It's, it's one thing. I mean, you can go out and have a brood of your own, you could go back old school and start popping out kids left and right, and have your own baseball team worth of little anarchists at home. But that still doesn't change the other people. And what you're saying, I think you're right, because the people that really believe that that's the one and only method that's going to get us there and is, the only thing that needs to be done. I mean, most of them will say, oh, we realize it's going to take, I hear people say 100, 200 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. Which, yes, if people started raising their kids peacefully, and enough of them did over the generations, it probably would take at least that long. But that idea to me is it's like a peaceful eugenics, doing it just that way and not trying to fix the other people and just saying, yeah, they'll all die off eventually. But unfortunately, as we do often have to explain to statists who automatically assume that, when we say stuff like, we don't need cops, you could get private defense, and they freak out because all the bad people they expect there. Well, nowadays, most of the bad people are in government, but those other ones do exist and will always exist short of full-scale eugenics. So that, just as you said, you can teach all these kids these tenets, but in the end, there's still going to be those bad people, and if there's enough of them, they will overtake them in a hurry, and we won't get anywhere. So I think you're absolutely right. I think we do have to attack it in the present as much as possible too. Some people aren't really up to that, and that's fine. If you just want to do your own thing and pray on the peaceful parenting method as what all you're going to do, we need that too. But there definitely has to be people out there pushing back and challenging, and I do it as often as I can. It drives my wife nuts because she wishes I wouldn't, but I do like to poke the beast as much as possible.
Yeah, I think two things are not evident to the most of the populace right now, that really are a win for us in the hardcore libertarian camp, is that technology is advancing faster than government can handle.
Yeah.
And they honestly can't stop it, especially if that worldwide free internet comes out. That's you're talking North Korea, Russia, China. They can't censor the internet because, oh, hey, I can just pop my cell phone on, and so technology and spreading ideas or how you can spread ideas through technology is just astounding at this level. The news cycle has gotten so short, people forget things a day after it happens. This kid just shot up a black church No one will remember that in a week. So this technology is just destroying this control to push a narrative that the government has so desperately clung on to for years and years and years and years. You mix that with people have seen, and they have the facts now to support that socialism and large-scale collectivization has failed miserably for the human experience. They have fact to back that up. I mean, even Russia is, one could say, in a full-scale retreat from any kind of hardcore, truly, truly evil authoritarianism. I mean, they're still very authoritarian, but they're retreating because they see that the more freedom you give people, the better. And something Ben said the other day on the radio really blew my mind. I'm pretty sure it was Ben was talking about how the Jews weren't actually slaves, they were tax slaves.
Yeah.
And that really fucking 100% blew my mind. I've never heard that, because every, Charleston Heston movie you see and every other romanticized Jewish plight stories you hear, they were whipping and beating and killing the Jews, the Egyptians were, and it's kind of eye-opening.
I kind of hate to take it in this direction. I shouldn't say I hate to. I'm hesitant, but I'm going to do it anyway. If you consider the folks, and I'm not saying this derogatory, I literally love some of the people up in New Hampshire in the Free State Project. Some of the most important people in my life are up there, and I love what they're doing and everything like that. But if you listen to the general language that they use, like if one of them will get pulled over, and let's say their car is impounded temporarily, and let's say that they're taken into custody temporarily, well, the terminology that they will use up there in the Free State Project, and I shouldn't say that, I should say those people that are in New Hampshire that have moved there for liberty, but because some of them aren't technically in the Free State Project. But anyway, the terminology they will use, they will say, this costumed guy put a gun to their head and threw them in a cage and stole their truck. Now, so if they're telling the story using that terminology, technically they're correct on everything they said. It was a guy in a costume. He did have a gun. He did throw him in a cage. He did steal their truck. But if you use different terminology that most people use, then actually it was just it was a traffic stop. The guy was pulled over. His truck was impounded for 24 hours. It cost him a bunch of money, and then you think back, okay, now let's go back a couple thousand years, 3,000 years, 2,500 years, whatever it was, 2,700 years. And you think about, if you're going to be telling a story about those evil Egyptians, and here you are, you're the good guys, you're the Hebrews trying to get out of this bad tax situation. The terminology that you use is going to be hyperbolic. Is that the right word? Mm-hmm. It's going to be as derogatory as possible towards the bad guys as you're telling the story. So, I every time I say something bad about the wording used in the Bible, I get some hate mail, and I get some really upset people with me, and, they tell me they'll never listen to me again or whatever, and that's fine. But whenever I read the Bible, I always try to keep in mind that it's coming from a particular set of salesmen that are selling one particular view. And so when I'm reading the Jewish story of leaving Egypt and all of that, then I try to keep in mind that that's what I'm looking at it exactly through the eyes of the people who are wanting me to hear their story in one particular way. And then you look at actual Egyptian history on it, and there's almost nothing there. There's almost no references at all. Why is that? Because the way the Egyptian kings dealt with bad publicity was just to not have any publicity at all, no record of the bad publicity, and anybody who had the guts to go ahead and write it down someplace, they'd just kill him and wipe out the record. So, so there's nothing from the Egyptian side of the story. The only story that we have is the Israelite story, and so you have to kind of read between the lines to get it. What was his name? Robert Lefebvre? Robert
Lefebvre.
Yeah, he had a really good story about Joseph. It's over at the Mises Institute somewhere. And that was a real eye-opener for me. I actually heard that the first time when I was a kid in the 60s because my dad listened to his radio show. And I heard that back then. and it was at the time frame when the church that my parents went to actually played the movie, The Ten Commandments, the Charlton Heston version. And so, within, I would say 6 months or so of seeing the movie at church with Charlton Heston, and then I'm hearing on the radio this guy talking about it, and I'm like, this sounds a whole lot more like the real story than the Charlton Heston one. Because that one is almost, if you really look at it, it's a very cartoonish version of the story. But then again, let me change directions with all that, so that it's not just picking on my translation of the Bible, which again people get really mad at me about. But going back to whatever form of activism, whether you're engaging somebody on social media or whether you're raising your children, hoping that eventually enough generations of good people will produce a good result or whatever. I think one of the flaws that we all have a little bit within, if I can collectivize the entire liberty movement and libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, and I think one flaw that is very rampant among all of us, speaking for myself as well, is that we have a tendency to think that whatever the type of activism that we do it's a split thing. We either feel like, well, we're just not doing anything. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing what I could be doing. And we feel bad about it. We want to do more. Or the other side of it, anybody who's not doing the exact same activity that I'm doing is doing it wrong. So, in New Hampshire, they're putting chalk on sidewalks and they're getting a lot of attention doing that. But if you're not putting chalk on a sidewalk in Memphis, then you're just doing it wrong. Or if you're not chalking a sidewalk in Atlanta, then you're doing it wrong. And there's kind of that mentality. And it's like, you see that, kicking back to the Free State Project, you see that a little bit with some of the people up there. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're not in New Hampshire, you're doing it wrong. And I think that mentality really hurts us. I think we really need to realize that every time we engage somebody on Facebook, we're not just sitting in our mom's basement yapping on the internet. We're actually doing stuff. We're engaging people. We're working for that audience, for the 20 people or the 2 people that might read our engagement on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever the thing is. We're working for that person so that, the guy, here's a good example. I was at Libertarian Party's little doodad that they had in Pennsylvania a few years back. And Larkin Rose was there and a couple other really good hard hitters were there. And I was doing my little speech. And as I was doing my speech, they were cleaning up from the dinner. The Libertarian Party had this big dinner, and so I was talking at the end of the dinner, and the waiters were coming in cleaning up the tables. And one of the waiters, I had said something, I can't even remember the thing that I'd said, but I was talking to the Libertarian Party members, essentially telling them that voting is a waste of their time, and it's not going to get them what they think that it's going to get them, which is really, not a message that 80-year-old libertarians in a meeting want to hear. So they were giving me the look during this time. But this waiter who's picking stuff up off of one of the tables literally stops and turns around and looks at me. And so I'm looking and I'm talking at the 80-year-old libertarians in the Libertarian Party, but I'm really aiming that at the waiter that's back there in the back. And I'm really making my discussion for him, and I'm talking about Bitcoin, and I'm talking about, the problem is not going to get solved by going to government and asking government to fix what's wrong with the Federal Reserve. The way to get this thing done is to act like there is no Federal Reserve, to build a system that's resilient and that can go around the Federal Reserve and that can do everything that you need, not what government wants it to do, not what the bankers want it to do, but what we need it to do, and do it without the Federal Reserve. And that's what the blockchain can do, whether you're locked into Bitcoin or anything else. And this, I could tell this waiter he was hearing things that not only did they resonate with him, but he had never heard anything like that before. And once I got done, I knew that the LP members that I was talking to were just going to walk over to the people who had sponsored me to be there and said, don't have that. I knew they did this. This is my imagination. I don't have facts, but in my mind, I'm pretty sure they went over there and said, don't have that guy back here again, period. We don't want to see his face never again. And that's okay, because I know that waiter heard me, because later on, I'm giving another talk later that evening, and way in the back, sneaking in from the back and not even sitting down, just sneaking in the back, there's that waiter. And he had got off work and came around and figured out where I was talking next and went to a totally different room in the hotel, and he's hiding in the back listening to me. And we got to imagine that to be the case with every Twitter conversation, every Facebook conversation. I was in a online game, a massive multiplayer online game back in the late 90s, around 2000, I think, is when I stopped playing it. But I was one of the moderators in there, and I would engage people talking about the gold standard and about real money. And I was using this game as the platform because in the game, gold was money. So and the owners of the game, the programmers and that actually wrote the game, they would get worried about the economy of the game every now and then, and they would dump a bunch of free gold into the game, thinking they were helping people, thinking they were helping. Actually, they thought they were helping the newbies by just dumping gold into the game and giving, essentially free gold to the new people that were coming in who didn't know how to make money. But what they didn't understand is every time they did that, they blew prices out the window. They fouled up everything all across the board, and the whole economy of the game would suffer for weeks to try to absorb this, this giant dump of money that they put into it. And every time they did that, I was able to engage in conversation the old-time players who just had, let's say they had 2 million pieces of gold in their bank account, and that 2 million pieces of gold overnight became worth about the equivalent of 100 pieces of gold. And I could engage them in that and talk to them about it. And that was the platform that I was using. So I guess my point in that is that we have to understand that there's an endless supply of different ways to get this message across. And it's not always to the guy that we're talking to. So often there's all kinds of people who are listening on the side that we don't even know are there, or maybe they'll pick this up later. Maybe they'll see it in some kind of archive or something like that. And that's why it's so important to be doing this work.
That's the hint, hence the name of this show.
Seeds of, yes, exactly.
That's our only goal is to be non-confrontational, not say anything too radical. I mean, I know I sometimes go off the deep end.
Sometimes.
Most of the times, but if your cognitive dissonance never takes a hit to where so devious and so maniacal that you have to eventually question it, then you're going to be stuck fitting the narrative that your brain has made for the rest of your life. So you may get pissed off and huffy puffy, and the backfire effect comes in, and you build your castle walls higher. But I've planted my seed inside of your castle.
Yeah. I think Jeremy was saying too a minute ago about Russia and China and stuff. I think that was Jeremy that said that. And I wanted to throw this out too. Anybody who's out there who's creating media, just like this show, and there's so many podcasts and so many different things on Skype, and not Skype, I'm sorry, YouTube and all the different places like that, little videos that people have put together. One thing that I saw with my Bad Quaker podcast was that I would get randomly out of nowhere massive amounts of downloads from China, and I never understood this. One time I saw that my site was getting hit really heavy. I was up at like 1 o'clock in the morning or something, and I saw that my site was a little slow, and I went into the stats to see what was going on, and I was taking serious hits from China. And over the course of a few hours, I can't remember the exact numbers now, but I had one particular podcast that went a little bit viral in China, and I got 20,000 downloads within a 6-hour time frame or something like that. And they were coming, in the stats, you can see where this is coming from. They weren't coming from Google. They weren't coming from, they were coming from email hits. So there was a viral email of some kind that was going on in China, And there was people in Beijing, almost all the hits were coming from Beijing, and they were getting that email, following the link on the email, coming back to my website, and going so far as to download an entire podcast. And you think about it, you think about the quantity of people in China, and you think about, in the time frame in the United States between, say, I'm going to say around 2004 to 2012, when a lot of liberty activity took place, and Ron Paul, all that activity took place, and there was, Peter Schiff, and there was just Tom Woods blossom during that time frame, and there's so many really important stuff that was going on in that time frame. And it just kind of gave birth to this whole thing that we see now of what some people call the liberty movement. Just imagine what something like that in China could do. And if we think about, like, in the United States, how many of us are there really? There might be, on the low end, I'm going to be real conservative and say, I'll bet among ANCAPs, hardcore libertarian, tuned in, turned on, dropped out ANCAPs, I'll bet there's close to 100,000 of us at least, and there might be 1 million. There might even be more than that. But you think about what could happen in China just if they pick up the right podcast, the right thing that hits them in such a way that it becomes that viral thing and it takes off and it fits the little need that's over there at that particular time. You think about the wildfire that could start over there from something like that. Literally a seed making a grove, making a forest. It's just, the mind boggles at it, and it can happen with any podcast at any time. You never know. Like, you think of YouTube, and you think of some of the really crazy viral videos. Some cat playing the piano or some stupid thing, and you think about how big something like that gets and how quickly. If one of our pieces of media that we produce so much of, if one of those things took off in China or in India, just think of the impact. It's mind-blowing. And that's...
Are you aware of what's going on in Brazil and Cuba right now?
Not really.
Oh, it's would be a really cool topic for you to talk about on the Feens, or come back and talk about it here. But basically, in Brazil, they're having 300,000 people marches to the capital to demand the immediate resignation of their president, and they want to put in a president that's going to basically wipe out a lot of their taxation and market regulations.
Wow.
And it's they're called the anarcho-capitalistas.
Really?
Yes, that's happening in Cuba as well. Not to that level, because Cuba is still quite very
repressed. Yeah.
It's not as bad as the scary American media would like you to have, but there are people, I'm talking to them on Twitter all the time, that are, and I'm saying, if Cuba is getting this, why aren't you in America? The birthplace of freedom, as Sean Hannity would say. Why aren't you getting it if people in Brazil are getting it? That's what I'd say. Like, these people, most of these people in Brazil and Cuba, they don't have a pot to piss in, all right?
Well, that's why.
They're getting it.
But
Yeah.
that I think that's why, because they've, the most of the people here have been pampered. They talk about, when you grow up living the way most of us have, where even the poorest among us is still better off than most of the rest of the world has been. You're already at that, you're already hitting rock bottom a lot faster when you're one of those other people.
It just warms my heart to see a Mises.org sign in
it's
Brazil riot marches.
It's great, but to add on to that, and also what Ben was saying, it's funny when I look at our stats. We just started out. We're only on episode 15 at this point, but I look at our stats, and I actually get more excited that our most regular non-U.S. Hits have been from Russia and Japan. We've gotten the most on a fairly regular basis, and France too. But I get more excited about those 5 to 10 from those areas than I do from all the numbers that we get from the U.S. because I'm like, wow, we're reaching people out there. My train of thought was exactly what you were saying, Ben, that, you know, all it is that spark. Just get one person out there thinking this and listening to us, and it really it warms my heart that I've tracked this now, and I've seen that they, you know, the same numbers keep coming up from these places week after week after week, and it's like they're listening. This is great.
Yeah,
you know,
but it is awesome. Yeah.
But to lead back to what you were saying, Dave, that's the thing. It's like all it takes is that spark, but they're already so much lower than most of the people here are.
Well,
you know,
it goes to my point that technology is going to crush, not statism, because I don't believe the statism. I think people are still going to be statist 1,000 years from now, but it's crushing this idea that we need a ruler, that we need this all-encompassing centralized power and control of economy, etc., etc. I mean, there's people that want to live off the grid. They want to, and the technology is increasing that, and that's something the government's not going to be able to regulate. They're talking about, the government's trying to counteract their fascistic monopolies by saying, well, we're going to put meters on your solar panels. Okay, I'll just unhook I'll just unhook my solar panels when you're here. What are you going to do? Come say, hey, we know you didn't have them hooked up for, you know. Oh, my bad, a squirrel ate the wire. You know, it's that at this point, freedom and liberty is an immovable, or is an unstoppable force, and government is no longer an immovable object. They're a crumbling object, and eventually it's going to plow through. It's just we're in that we're in that transitional phase. You know that they want to, the media wants you to think, oh, socialism's getting worse, and communism is spreading, and all these people. It's like, well, look at Brazil, 300,000 people marching against the president and saying, we're going to get violent if you don't step down. You can't kill 300,000 people in the blink of an eye and kill the idea. You only make that idea stronger.
That's pretty wild. I'll have to look into that. I've seen like pictures of marches in Brazil, but I just figured, oh, they're mad about soccer or whatever. I didn't really. I mean, I hate to be that way, but I've just kind of passed over it. And I didn't really even look into it. But I'll have to do that. That would make a good episode for the Freedom Feens.
Yeah, it's really cool, especially if you could have one of your Spanish speakers on to talk to someone from Cuba or Brazil, or Portuguese speaker for Brazil.
Yeah, one of our co-hosts is in Mexico City, and I can't remember where he's. I think he's from Venezuela or Paraguay or somewhere. I'm not sure. One of the South American countries. So that would be really interesting to get him talking about that.
So do we want to shift gears and talk maybe some certain things? If you're hearing this and you're getting frustrated, if you're someone in the audience and you're debating with family, friends, whatever, online or in person or on the phone day after day, and it's wearing you down, it's beating you down, is there anything you guys would want to maybe give them tips, maybe help steer their ship a little bit, blow some wind in their sails? Because I know for me personally, until I kind of basically threw down my sword and shield and admitted that debating is pointless, and I do now try to steer people into not really Socratic, but like, hey, I'm a happier person because of this. Check this out. If you don't like it, move on along with your life. If you do like it, I'm free to answer any questions.
Well, I think we've been talking a lot about it throughout. It really, I think Ben hit on something too, that it really is. It's just you need to find what you're comfortable with, and work with that, and not worry about the people out there that may be like some of those people in New Hampshire, like some of the other cliquish type groups across the country that I've encountered that have that mentality that it's, well, if you're not doing it our way, then you're doing it wrong. There's everybody is different, and I just look at it from my own position, and where I was, where I came from, how I got there, and some of my other friends that I made early on in my journey, that we all kind of came into this together. And, I saw the paths that they took. And even so, the most success I've had so far is with my dad. I've talked about this on shows before. He's the one who actually inadvertently set me down this path, because he was a hardcore constitutionalist, and he just wanted me to understand how horrible Obama was, and that he was a Muslim, and all these wonderful, Tea Party-esque things. And that's actually what got me. I actually set out
Muslim socialist.
Yeah, exactly. But
no, he's a fascist.
Well, in a hat tip to the Feens, I will have to agree that he is a liar, a socialist, and his feet do stink. But aside from that, he set me on that path, and I actually decided to start studying history to prove him wrong. Like, that was my goal. My goal was to prove him completely wrong and say that, you're a tinfoil hatter, you're a crazy man. And it turned out, I bypassed him on some of the political stuff, but a lot of the other things he was talking about, I was like, wait a minute, you're not so crazy. You actually, there is some truth here. And then I kept digging and went past him and blew past him. And I ended up, deciding that I finally admitted to myself that I was an anarchist. And now I've actually finally got him coming around the corner. He still can't let go of the national defense thing yet, but I'm working on that. But I see it with him. I see how his transitions go. So I take all that information and I say, okay, this handful or this small group of people that I know personally, every one of us took a different path. Every one of us had that one aha moment, that one thing that made it click. And it was almost never forced. Although I do know a couple of people that the beat it over your head approach actually did work on. So when people say, oh, you can't do that, it'll never work, it's not true. It will, not often, but it will. But the point is that everybody has that thing that sticks in their mind that will make it click, and you just have to find that. So trying out different methods and I've also said before that, for me, the realization that I will most likely never see the full-scale change that I have envisioned in my head in my lifetime actually puts me at peace. It used to frustrate the heck out of me when I first came to, when I was that angry anarchist, and I just wanted to yell to everybody and make everybody change their minds right away, and they weren't getting it, and I was getting so mad because I just wanted it right now. When that was me for the first year or so, and then I finally started to realize that, number one, I had alienated a heck of a lot of people in my life because I was just so obnoxious about this, and so in your face, that I had to sit back for a second. I said, okay, now I thought about it, and I talked to some other people, and I talked to some people that have been doing this a lot longer than me, and said, yeah, we're not going to see this anytime soon. You just have to keep plugging away. And I said, okay, that makes sense. So it brought me like this peace where now it's almost like a pressure release. Like, I don't feel that pressure. Like, I have to keep going. I have to keep going because this has to happen before I die. So I'm all about, just taking my time with people and just poking and trying different methods and find what works for each person. And also, as we've discussed before, that it really is just, if you can go in with the mindset, especially if you're going to go in front of a group of people, even as some social function, and you're willing to talk about this stuff, or if it's on social media, wherever it is, if you can go in with a mindset that, as Ben and I have both said, your target audience isn't that one person, it's whoever else is watching. And you can also stick to the one mind at a time principle that I really try to keep in my head. Like, it's a mantra I say to myself. Like, anytime I think about getting discouraged, I keep saying, I'm doing this one mind at a time. I'm not trying to get a whole group of people at once to understand. I'm just looking for that one person who's willing to pause and ask questions and think. And that's it. And like, I do a happy dance when I find those people. I'm in a crowd, or if I'm online in a large group, and you get that one person who like private messages you and wants to ask more questions. It's like, yes, success. So that's it's like you said, Dave. I mean, it's easy to get discouraged. It really is. But if you can keep in mind that it's not, if it happens before I die, freaking great. I will be ecstatic. But if you keep in mind that there's a good chance it's not going to happen, but as we've also talked about, you need to do your part now. You can't just push it off on the next generation and say, well, they'll do it. They'll get to it. Everybody's got to, if you really want it, if you really believe in freedom, if you really want to live free, completely. I mean, we can all live as free as we possibly can right now, living an agorist type lifestyle, which I try to do. but you still have that fear of them breathing down your neck. For a certain, anytime you cross, as was talked about much earlier in the show, if you cross any government agent on a bad day, you never know what kind of power they will try to use against you. So, just keep thinking that it's tough, but if you really want it, you got to put in some work. So try to diversify, find what works for you and find what works for other people and combine those two, and just go out there and try to have fun with it.
There's one more thing too. Everything you said, I agree with. There was something else I was thinking of too, though. Here in America, I heard this as a sermon in a church in probably about 1982 or 83, and so I'm going to heavily adapt it for my own purposes. But there was a guy, the guy who was giving this sermon, he made the comparison. He said, you think about cathedrals that were built in Europe during the Dark Ages, and this is a time when it would take all the resources that a small town could come up with both taxation and voluntary gifts and everything that they could do to come up with enough money to buy the bronze that it would take to cast a bell. And they would do it. They would cast a bell not even having a belfry to put the bell in. But they were doing this because they believed in a real long-term victory of Christianity. And this was the guy's story that he was telling in this sermon. He says, now, so it would take generations to build the great cathedrals that were being built in 1200 and 800 AD and 1200 AD and 1400 AD. It would take multiple generations to build those things. And he said, now you look across America and, a church pops up and they buy a metal frame. They come out, they pour a slab on the ground. That's poured in one day. They come out with a metal frame. They throw that thing up in a couple of weeks. They toss a roof on it. And you have a church. Bang, it's done. And if the church ever fails or the church wants to grow and move to a different location or whatever, it's a tear-down building. It costs almost nothing to build it. There's no structure there. You can just tear it down, build another one. It's no big deal. So much so that, if you're going to build up a pharmacy at a corner, the brand name, let's say it's CVS. Well, CVS will tear down a perfectly good building to build a building that looks exactly like all the other CVSs because they have a theme. Or if it's, one particular restaurant, they'll tear down a perfectly good building to build one that's in their theme just to get it to look the way they want. And it's built so cheaply that when they're done with it and they move on, the next company that comes in will tear that one down and build another one because construction is so cheap. But the cathedrals because the mindset in America today is always thinking short term. We want liberty now. We want it in our lifetime. We want it right now. We want the government to collapse right now. I want all my rights right now. And if I don't have it, I'm going to stomp my feet and cry until a cop hauls me away. And that's kind of the mentality that we have. We have this spoiled thought pattern that says, if I don't get what I want right now, I'm going to scream and cry until I get it. But that wasn't the thought pattern of people during the Dark Ages, or the so-called Dark Ages. They thought, if all we can afford to do is get enough together that we can get the bronze, then maybe we'll have a bell for our children. And maybe our children can get enough and they can build, and they believed that to a certain extent their eternity was based on whether or not they had a good cathedral and they could please God with this fabulous building, and convince the heathen to come and be part of their religion. They believed, rightly or wrongly, that was their reality, that they had to do that for their eternity. And so they were building for generations. And I really think that we need to realize that in our minds, that we're not just building something for this generation. We really are laying groundwork. And there's been, maybe we're above groundwork. Maybe we're doing the plumbing right now. I don't know how to make the metaphor exactly correct. Because Spooner and we got Locke and we got all these other people that have came before us, and Mencken and all these really great thinkers that we're relying upon. And so I don't know where we're at in this building, but I don't want to just throw up a cheap tin metal, a cheap tin roof on a thing that could be magnificent. I would rather take our time and get it right, and not just have the next wind that comes through blow it down. I don't know if I.
No, you nailed it right there. That was awesome. And people always say, "Oh, there's a failed state over there. That's anarchy. Go look at that, and that's what you'll get." And I say, yeah, but anarchy is when people don't want a state. And that's not what's happening in that area. You have people that want a state. They have no state, but they want one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the problem. To quote Larkin Rose, government's just an idea in everyone's head. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And your belief is the only thing propping it up. If tomorrow no one believed that the government was legitimate, no one would pay their taxes, they wouldn't be able to afford enough people to enforce that idea, and no one would work for it to do that, it would disappear overnight. So what you said was right. We have to build people or not build people. We have to show people that we can be free. To quote Henry David Thoreau, don't tell a man he's wrong, show a man he's wrong.
Yeah.
To paraphrase. Men believe what they can see. Man believes what he can see. And that's why there's people that, that's why there's so many atheists out there. They can't see God. If they could see God, there wouldn't be any atheists out there. So you just carry that sentiment over to pretty much everything you're trying to convey to someone. Don't tell people they're wrong. Show people they're wrong. Show them why they're wrong by action, not by anger and hate. I have a T-shirt idea I'm working on. It's destroy fear with hate, or destroy fear with love.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to do is destroy this fear. That's pretty much why the state exists, is because of fear.
I mentioned cryptocurrencies before, and as opposed to in the Fed, and that's kind of the same theme that I try to push on that it's not so much complaining about the existing system. I mean, I complain about the existing system all the time, but the real answer is in creating a thing that can go around the existing system and bypass it. And the argument between I've brought this up a couple times here lately, the argument between Rothbard and I can't remember the other guy that was one of the early thinkers on agorism. They
Proudhon.
No, it was a Rothbard and I just read it about it. What's his name? Schocken or Konkin? Yes.
Yeah. Konkin. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, and of course they were arguing about it when the technology doesn't exist that exists today. So they were their argument, I would say, is not really all that valid because they couldn't imagine the things that we have today. But
so Karl Marx wasn't right in 18,000 years ago? Is that what you're telling me? That his stuff doesn't stand the tale of time? That the world's not just full of factories and evil owners?
But I really think,
sorry.
That's okay. But I really think that these cutting edge things. What Cody Wilson is doing. Cody is such an interesting person anyway. But then he says, all right, so the government says you can't make your own gun. All right. Well, okay, here's the plans. Now they're on the internet. You can't take them back. And the government says, oh, you can't do that. You can't turn those loose on the internet. Too late. Yeah. It's done. You can't take the pee out of the pool. It's in there. You can't. it's not coming out. You can get mad at me all you want. It's already done. All right. So whatever you do, you can't create these horrible ghost guns. Yeah, you can. Here's the printer. Here's the milling machine that does it. Now what are you going to do? Oh no. Well, now we realize the software is in existence. There's milling machines all over the world. Any good milling machine can do this now. Now you've got the software for it. It's literally the genie bottle situation, and you can't stuff it back in, or the urine in the pool. It's the same thing, and that's what we're doing we're going out there with cryptocurrencies, and we're going out there with, printable guns, and we're going out there with, milling machines that can create the stuff that the government. And I've said this before, and this goes right in with the seeds of liberty and the Johnny Appleseed concept. I've said before that, we've got some really smart people who are anarcho-capitalists, and if we can get somebody who can crossbreed marijuana so that it grows as abundantly as like dandelions. And
Kudzu. Kudzu. I heard that, exactly. And I said, I'm from Alabama. I said kudzu.
Yeah. You see it down here. It takes over whole forests.
You can't get rid of it. You have to, even if you burn the whole field, the seeds they get back in the air, and then got kudzu again. They plant it to feed deer.
I'll tell you something else is, what are those morning glories? I used to have a garden before I went on the road and we started living in an RV. I had for years, I had a garden. And one year I planted morning glories. And they're beautiful, but they don't last very long. And then you've got this plant that's useless and it turns brown and it's ugly. But one planting of morning glories, your whole neighborhood is going to have morning glories forever, because those things just seed so abundantly. And if somebody was to create a hybrid version of pot with, maybe it's not the greatest THC levels in the world, but it's got a moderate THC level, but it seeds like mad, and then just get it out there and plant it between every, between the lanes of every freeway, underneath every overpass, just, get into state parks and just sow that stuff in state parks.
Ben, have you ever heard of what's happened to psilocybin cubensis?
Oh, the mushroom? No.
Oh, okay. So when the cops confiscate a ton of it from someone who's growing has a lab and growing a lot of it, they get it all over their clothes. They get the spores all over their clothes. They get it all over their badge, their gun, the cars, the vans that they're. In San Francisco, they've tried to stop mushrooms, people from selling them so badly that they have inadvertently spread it. They are so common that you cannot stop it. That's why California had to pass the law that as long as you're not growing it, it's not illegal. If you find it on the side of the road or in the forest, you can pick it all you want.
Wow.
So if you go to the San Francisco Police Department, there's a field beside it, and this is Terrence McKenna's story, not mine. At certain parts of the year, the entire field is full of psilocybin cubensis. They've actually had to put guards up because people will go out there with bags and pick it.
Wow.
So this whole idea, it's a spore, like you're saying, is, maybe not with marijuana. I don't think that's as conscious expanding as mushrooms, but with the spores, like, you can't defeat it. Like, that's if one mushroom creates 1 million spores, how do you stop that? That gets on the officer's clothes. He goes home, his wife washes his clothes. Now the spores are all over all their clothes. Their daughter goes frolicking through the backyard. The spores go everywhere. So there's no way to stop it.
I really think that's how we defeat laws, though, is we just create so much outside of law that the law becomes silly, and then...
That's how Prohibition ended, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't afford to enforce it anymore, and it was so publicly... and that's another thing to go on another topic. It just doesn't... that's how stupid people are. They see that the alcohol prohibition didn't work, right? But they think that drug prohibition of all drugs now will work in some way. For some reason, I don't know why. But as we've talked in past episode, all it is the only reason the Drug Enforcement Agency still exists is because you have a welfare boondoggle that the government will not end, because that is a voting class that they are not willing to drop.
Yeah. On drugs, I saw with the horrible shooting that took place lately, and the different, people, especially on the left, that are saying, "Oh, this is why we need outlaw guns." And I saw a meme with the little baby who's got that funny look on his face, and it says, if outlawing, something to the effect of, if outlawing guns would get rid of shootings like this, all we have to do is outlaw them. Well, then why don't we just outlaw, methamphetamine and heroin? Why don't we just outlaw them? That way the drug problem would go away. And the kid's got that funny look on his face, like, what?
Yeah.
Or why don't we outlaw higher learning and
yeah.
We'd have the smartest people in the world if there was a vicious crackdown on learning stuff.
Well, I think the planting of things like that. I think there was a group that I can't remember the name of them, but they did it a couple of years ago. It was essentially a guerrilla gardening tour with cannabis seeds, and they were just trampsing all over the place. I think it started out they did it in D.C. and people would just walk and they were marching all together and they were literally just throwing seeds because they actually do marijuana seeds actually catch and grow pretty easily. You just throw, so that's what people were doing. They were just on a march, and they were just every once in a while, people would just throw out handfuls of seeds and just throw them out in the field.
Weeds grow fast, right?
Well, exactly. You just throw them out everywhere, and yeah, to get a more concentrated effort with that would be wonderful because. Dave, you said they're not as psychoactive as mushrooms, but I don't think that's the point. The point is just to get it.
I said conscious expanding. It's a different theory, but sure.
No, I get you. But to get it out there, as Ben said, when it becomes so much, they can't. What are they going to do about it?
It becomes unenforceable.
It's literally everywhere. You can walk out your front door and pick it off your sidewalk or the little patch of lawn in front of your house if you have, if you're in a place like me on Long Island, what are they going to do? It's literally everywhere. Well, they're not going to have a choice.
GMO weed just got made by Monsanto, so let's just hope maybe there's some twisted weed addict up at not that you can be addicted to weed, but some twisted weed proponent up there in Monsanto that has created this super strain of weed that can't be, it just grows like wildfire.
Not to go down that path, but actually, as soon as you said that, the first thing that popped into my head was a bad thing, obviously, and my thought was, yeah, they're creating their own marijuana.
Believe it or not everyone that works for evil corporations is evil. I know that's a crazy.
That's not the point.
I'm just picking at you.
I could easily see them doing that so that when their seeds get out there and cross-pollinate, they can claim they already do that with farmers. They're claiming patent violations for their seeds blowing onto other people's property. They'll do that with the marijuana seeds, and that's that would be a very insidious thing by the government to do, to use Monsanto to stop the proliferation of weed around the country. But that's a topic for another day. But yeah, I think these things. These things are great doing out there, and just we talked about this last week actually on the show about of ways to fight back through non-compliance, and just going out there and living your life and doing stuff like this. Like, you see these ridiculous laws and you can think of a way to circumvent them, and you can find a group of people that are willing to help you out, go for it. The more people that are out there doing this stuff and just simply disobeying, these laws will eventually all have to crumble. They won't have a choice. There's nothing to enforce at that point, and I think to get back to just quickly what was said earlier about the timeline and everything, and not, Ben said about not putting up the house too quickly. That's something that I've always, since I got out of my angry stage, I've said that, and I get in arguments with people who say, if the state falls and right now, and I'll be happy, and then whoever's not ready, screw them. It's like, no, it's not going to work on that level. Like, we need some more numbers. Like you said, Ben. Even if we have a million right now, that's still not nearly enough to really make it a nationwide change. So I always
just look at how much press coverage the Liberland guys got. Think about how many people saw that.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, see,
millions.
I don't really know anymore because I don't check anything but alternative media, so I don't actually know what's getting out to the mainstream media anymore.
Well, Fox, CNN, ABC, all of them covered it. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, but they're laughed at. I'm sure they're laughed at. I mean, I'm sure they love when the.
You can laugh all you want. What did Gandhi say? First they laugh at you, then they hate you, and then they hurt you, and then they join you.
No, then you win. That was the last line of that. But yeah, so anyway, I guess we should get wrapping up now.
So Ben, do you want to just go ahead and plug away everything that whatever?
Sure. If anybody is not familiar with the Bad Quaker podcast, I did somewhere around 400 episodes or so, and they are available on torrent feed, but they're also available in an archive form. Currently, they're at badquaker.com, and you can dig through the files there and get them all. But that's going to eventually disappear at some point in time. So if you get over to Art of Not Being Governed, they have a mirror of all of the episodes over there. If you just go through their links, you can find it in there. BadQuaker.com's archive of all the, like I say, somewhere close to 400 episodes. And then currently, I'm working with the Freedom Feens on somewhere around 30 to 35 radio stations. It changes back and forth every few days, but somewhere between 30 and 35 radio stations. We're on 7 days a week. One of those shows every week is a best of. So we have 6 active shows every week. I'm generally on the weekends. I generally do Saturday and Sunday at noon Central Time. And we try to have an upbeat show, because since we're on the radio, we're also on the internet at freedomfeens.com. But since we're actually on the radio, and especially the weekend show where we're in the middle of the day, so you're getting folks going to picnics, and you're getting people between coming from church going to the VFW lodge or whatever. So we try to keep things on an upbeat. Not so much crying about the state, or not so much condemning the state, and not so much hitting hardcore, anarchist theory and really getting into it. We try to keep things as light as possible, yet while baiting the hook with as much as we can do at the same time. So that's kind of the purpose of the Freedom Feens, is to just constantly keep it light, keep it upbeat, throw the hook out there, and just keep baiting them, almost like chumming the water, for better fishing. We're just out there like in the movie Jaws. We're just dumping blood into the waters, hoping somebody will come to the surface. And that's kind of actually that's a good one. That's a lot better what the Freedom Feens do. We're not throwing out hooks with bait on it. We're just dumping chum into the ocean for the sharks. We're trying our best to make feeding frenzies happen.
I enjoy every time you and Bill are on. I listen when I can, but I directly listen to when you and Bill are on. Bill is one of my favorite human beings of all time, and I've never met him. I want to.
He's pretty cool. We have a really good crew. I mean, if you really get into there and you start thinking about it, like he's done a lot of different projects. His face and his name are not real well known like some of the other people, but man, Chandler is solid, and he has been doing this for a long time, making a lot of media. And we got Derek J up there in Keene, New Hampshire, and Derek is solid, and he's every Monday night. Sunday night, Monday morning, he does the show. And we got Randy England, who is a writer for Lou Rockwell, and he's also an attorney, an active attorney. So he's like super smart, And then we've got Bill Bupert, who is a man of unbelievable, he has talent in so many directions, and a thinker. It bruises my brain every time I talk to him, because it forces me to think, I really enjoy that. And then we've got, it's just a real eclectic group of people. We've got people in Scotland. We've got people in Mexico City. We've got, and it's expanding. Michael Dean, who is, the crazy person behind the screen on all this stuff, he's constantly working on getting new people into this. So he's got several people, in the wings that he's coaching and trying to bring into a position where he can bring them into it. And that's the whole purpose of the Freedom Feens, is to not only chum those waters like I was saying, but also to train up people so that, what Michael says is he makes it bus proof, so that if he's walking down the street one day and a bus takes him out, hey, it's just going to scatter, like we're talking about. It's going to scatter the seeds, and there's going to be spores all over everything, and in 15 more shows will crop up. So, if something happens to take him out, we're going to spread. It's going to be like cutting the head off of the Hydra. We're just going to sprout 6 more, So anyway, that's what we're trying to do. I don't know how long I'm going to stay with it. I really need to, to back out and just enjoy my retirement, sit on the beach. But as long as these things are still in my brain, you just got to spit them out. You can't sit.
Yeah, it would be a crime.
Yeah. It eats you from the inside if you don't say anything.
Yeah, that's what I said the other day to a few friends who were like, "Man, would you just stop?" I'm like, I really don't care how many friends I lose. I don't really care about how many family members disown me or how many people think I'm crazy. I'm not gonna stop. I'm not gonna stop. I don't care. The fear of losing friends and family has left me.
When you know you have right on your side, it's really difficult to then stop and be quiet and say nothing.
Oh yeah, look at Martin Luther.
Yeah.
The courage it took to do what he did, and everyone who had done that previous to him was brutally murdered by the church. So you either have to make your stand or cower.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would just like to thank Ben so much for coming on with us tonight. We really appreciate it. For anybody who doesn't listen to the Feens or doesn't know about the Feens, I would highly recommend you checking them out any way you can. That's actually how I got to know about Ben. I started listening to the Feens late last year, and I pretty much haven't missed an episode since. Again, my situation is a little different than most people. I spend 6 to 10 hours a day walking dogs and driving between stops, so I have lots of time to listen to podcasts, which I do all day long. And I like Dave. I'm always extra happy when you were on the show. I actually, unfortunately, never got a chance to listen to your Bad Quaker podcast, although I do now seed torrents for the Feens, so I have every one of your episodes downloaded to my computer, and that is the next run I am going to start on. I was actually
I've listened to a few.
The very first one I listened to, because I just started seeding a couple days ago, because I heard Michael say something about it again. I'm like, I gotta get on doing this. So I went and did it. And when yours popped up, the first listing is like a quadruple 0, and it's just a bunch of your, I guess, tiny little things that you started off with maybe. And the very first one was about dogs. And I was like, this is great, because dogs are my life. I own a pet sitting company, so I'm with dogs pretty much all day long. I board them at my house and walk them during the day. So when I heard that, I'm like, oh, this is great. This is a great way to start, and I'm very excited to listen to more. So again, thank you very much for coming on. People, check out the Feens.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a delight. We're gonna have to have you back on another episode one day to talk about something else.
Yeah. Yep, I'm available.
All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for watching. This has been the Seeds of Liberty podcast. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all of that can be found at theseedsofliberty.com. Dave, anything else you want to add?
Plant seeds, and what I said last week, a little spark of truth can burn an entire forest of lies.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you for listening and watching.
Peace.